So, wow, thank you guys for hanging in there. I want to talk about a couple of things. I've thought about how I was going to wrap this up, and I want to kind of really combine two different things. And I think that sometimes the one thing I'll talk about is a bit of a struggle. But there is a dynamic in the midst of everything that happens to us throughout moments of our lives where we find ourselves attaching to different moments of our life, different events, different people, different statements, things we can't unhear, experiences that have pain that viscerally kind of just navigate their way into our persona. And what it does is it creates a narrative that we carry on, and we make a lot of narratives and agreements with those narratives when it comes to different aspects of our life. We may do it about ourself, about our spouse, about our faith, about what sexuality is, about our life, about our work. We start to carry and develop these narratives that really, again, shape the way that we behave. But we're all natural storytellers. It's how we organize our internal and external words. We spend a great proportion of our time encoding the information giving and taking from us into the matrices of the meaning that we use to interpret and predict relationship experiences and outcomes. Stories have used by millennia by indigenous peoples to convey everything from hunting wisdom to navigation, passing on values, traditions, even teachings. And the whole gospel is the stories of the Bible that have been passed on to us. But they are as central to our identities and how it shapes our identities. But most of the fundamental stories that we create about our identities were shaped by the perceptions of our parents, our teachers, our coaches, significant others. The more consistent the feedback, the more indelible the story. As we move through adolescence and into adulthood, these personal narratives are interwoven into the fabric of who we are and how we view the world. They also feed forward into the types of experiences and relationships that we seek, either confirming or refuting our beliefs and expectations. But more often than not, we seek out information and gravitate to environments and situations that reinforce our personal narrative, a phenomenon that's referred to as confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that supports one's prior beliefs and value. Confirmation bias is an important piece of how we frame the dynamics of what we attach ourselves to, what we believe about it, what we behave about the belief and the meaning that we attach to it. Because if we find something and we believe something to be something, right? And something comes out of that entity that confirms what we believe about it, now we feel justified in our belief system. But that can be really, really magnified sometimes to where the belief and the meaning that we attach to something screws us up. When I was in grade school, my older brother was dubbed the family math genius. Plain and simple. He was a student who got A's in math without opening a book and received a great deal of recognition. And I realized very early on that despite my interest in math, he was the designated genius, which by default made me not the math genius, right? By default, because there can only be one. But in that moment, over time, that identity became part of my personal story. It not only shaped my behavior, but it had a significant bearing on the academic and career choices that I made early on in my adult life. As I mentioned, I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology for mechanical design engineering, sound engineering, and plasma physics. And then I realized There were no women in engineering, and I didn't get along very well with engineers. I was a little bit much for them. But in that space, by the time I was moving through my education, I stopped liking math, and I stopped taking any advanced level courses because this whole I'm bad at math, because my brother's great at it, hence I'm not. But it was a confirmation bias that I created myself in those moments. And by doing this, it was only through my overwhelming desire to change that, to pursue a major in engineering, and with the support of a wonderful math teacher, that I eventually discovered that I was quite good at math. But I even discovered that I had a knack to even work out quantum equations, which is super nerdy stuff. But in that moment, through practice and perseverance, I debunked the myth and rewrote the story that I told that I was bad at math. Now, the problem with this is that myth still wants to take a hold of me. I turned my engineering career into building Jeeps and rock crawlers and off-road chassis, and my wife and I taught an off-road school that aired on a couple different cable TV channels. But when I'm in front of my tube bender and I got to make a certain curve or an angle or a roll bend where I got to feed it through my thing, and the angle is weird, and I'm looking at it and I'm not trying to figure it out, boy, that myth yells loudly, see, you suck at what you're doing. Why? Because I attached myself to a story based on a belief system that wasn't true. And I made it true. Why? Because I self-prophesied. I self-realized my own damage by not looking for truth and just making an assumption that because of A, I am B. And I was always B. But when I'm working in my shop and the stress triggers that story, something triggers, I'm bad at math. Even when I know that I've rewritten that story, it can almost feel as though it's etched in stone in some way till I challenge it. And honestly, I go back now to seeking the Lord's truth instead of my own fleshy version of what I believe about myself. Even after I erase and replace that story, the enemy uses them to arise to the surface, particularly when I get stressed, tired, or fearful, or overwhelmed or anxious. And in those moments, I'm nowhere near the Lord. That line of sanctification that James talks about, that line is constant. But our line looks like this. It's just constant, and there's times. His line is straight, and our line never touches his line. If anything, when we get close to the Lord's line, he goes, I need more of you, and he moves it. Very difficult. But not all the narratives that we have are negative or harmful. They're certainly not intractable. We live out our stories in one way or another, some limiting and some empowering. Psychologists Jeffrey Cohen and David Sherman speak of a mindset in which individuals view themselves as strong, capable, resilient, and able to overcome any challenge. What they call a narrative of personal adequacy. In a review of the impact of self-affirmation on behavior, they find that positive self-affirmations can do positive impacts to health, relationship, and even outcomes with one's personal growth, sometimes for months and even years. Conversely, negative narratives lead to devastating long-term consequences and self-fulfilling prophecies in the world, in the words of psychologist Abraham Maslow. Again, very cliche, but if the only tool you have is a hammer and everything else looks like a nail. But the more that you hold to a particular belief, the greater power it has over you. If you believe you're unworthy, if you believe that God doesn't love you, if you believe that you're the sum of your past mistakes and you're unforgivable, then it will try to have power over you. And Satan will keep you living in that story, because all it'll take is for something to confirm in your confirmation bias that you're no good. Right? You stumbled again, you failed again, you did something that puts you back in that thing. But in that, I want you to know that the Lord has only one story about you. That you are redeemed, courageous, loved, precious, fearfully and wonderfully made, washed clean by the blood of Christ and his beloved Son, for whom he is well pleased. Period. There's no buts. No buts. But our stories don't develop in isolation. They are shaped by years of social and relational interactions. Abuse of all kinds, neglect, abandonment, father wounds, mother enmeshment, addiction, and the list goes on. But some are positive and some are negative. But we as humans, interestingly enough, we tend to remember painful events more than pleasant ones. For example, we're often more likely to recall a critical comment that our spouse makes than a positive one. This is a phenomenon referred to as negativity bias. So we have the confirmation bias, which is the brokenness that says, yep, the moment that I see something that confirms what I believe, then that must be true, even if it's not. But once I believe it, it might be. But then we have the negativity bias, which is we constantly are looking for the negative thing to come. How many times have you told people about a negative experience you had somewhere? Did you ever go to that car shop? Oh, me at that car shop, they took me for whatever, right? We go down that road, we grouch about everything. Nobody says, hey, you know what? The waitress really worked hard last night. That place was rocking and we got everything that we needed. You don't tell that story. But God forbid, you don't get your freaking crab cakes in the timely fashion. I guess that's a thing out here. I'm going for some tonight, I guess. But we're more likely to notice the negative things and later remember them more vividly. News media eats this up nightly. Bad news sells. We can all recall that bad customer service in quite detail. But as flesh-driven humans, we tend to remember traumatic experiences better than positive ones, recall insults more than praise, react more strongly to negative stimulus. Right? How many times have you drank something and you go, oh, taste this. Right? We always want to pass on the negative stimulus. No, that person has to experience how crummy this is. And we get into that space that we think about negative things more frequently than positive ones, but we respond more strongly to negative events than as ones that are equally as positive. For example, you might have a great day at work, and some coworker makes an offhand comment that you find irritating. Never happens. But then you find yourself stewing over that person's words, and as I like to say, you let that person rent valuable space in your head. I used to almost lose my Christianity daily while driving my truck. I get cut off. I was the guy, literally. I would miss my exit to give somebody the finger one more time. No joke. And then I realized God loves him too. And that's what I say anytime I get cut off now by the people from Texas or California. God loves them too. But in that moment, I just want to respond more strongly to those negative events. But I let that guy, when I used to let that thing happen to me, where I became something, I would let that person rent space in my head, and I was giving up my power. And let me tell you what, Jack, I have no desire to give anybody any more power over me. But it's so easy to get to that place. But when you get home from work and your spouse asks you how your day was, and out of the gate it was terrible, even though it was quite good except for that one incident. We let one incident rent space and just determine the entire reality of what we go through in those moments. Why? Because we make a story about it. And we can't wait to talk about the idiot at the work who made one off-color comment and we let it ruin 23 and a half hours the rest of the day. But this bias toward the negative leads us to pay much more attention to the bad things that happen, making them seem much more important than they really are. Another example is when I ask men, What is the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word consequence? And I always make a joke that the most intimacy, anorexia-ridden guy in the room blurts out, punishment! It's like, easy with the punishment. All behavior has cause and effect. Why has it got to be punishment? Because pain follows second in that. But there's cause and effect to all behaviors. Consequences can be good, consequences can be bad. But the negativity bias always goes to the bad, right? A consequence has to be negative, it can't be good. I don't look at consequences in our recovery as punishments. I don't. My wedding ring is not that which makes me married, is it? I'm not married because of this thing. What is it? It's a symbol, right? It says I'm in a covenant relationship with another human being. Our baptism, for those of us that are believers and consider ourselves saved individuals, we're not saved because we're baptized, right? What is it? Our baptism is a public declaration that I've made a turn away from my sin, I've died to myself, been raised in Christ, and that baptism is a public declaration to whom? To the Lord, to my church community, or to those around us. And then when I go to this place of consequences, when I talk about having good consequences, when you get to that crossroad in your recovery, where you can either blow it up or you can make the next right choice, the good consequences are important. I might be intimate with my wife. I might get to hold her hand. I might not have to go leave the house again because I lied to her. I might not. Yeah, you might not if you make the next right choice. Or you can blow it up and break her trust and have to sleep in the garage or write Nancy Pelosi a $500 check or write Planned Parenthood a $1,000 check. That'll keep you from masturbating real quick, won't it? Or giving away something that you hold dear, because the consequence isn't something that you put on yourself as a punishment, it's a deterrent. I am so committed to this recovery work and to the boundaries that I put in my life that the good consequences are loud enough to say, God, Matt, make the next right choice. Protect your wife's heart, love her well. Cast off the lie that Satan's going to try to bring you to this moment lie of pleasure that's going to lead to destruction. Make the next right choice. But if you just start getting bent and leaning toward that choice, yeah, but it looks so good. Whoa, that's a loud deterrent. And I don't want to do that thing. So guess what? I'm going to make the next right choice. That's not a punishment. The best part about consequences when you have them in your recovery is that if you act right, you never have to do any of them. And it may be something simple, going without coffee for 3 days. I drink 40 ounces of coffee a day, if you haven't figured it out. I like my coffee, but if I don't do my dailies with my wife, I go without coffee for 3 days. That's my consequence for not initiating the dailies. But the stories that I tell myself about the consequences that can put on myself. Some guys are like, my consequences are shaming. No, you just don't want to do them. That's about something bigger than whether or not you have put consequences on yourself. And by the way, divorce is not a consequence. Guys, that's a cop-out for guys that don't want to choose consequence. Well, Matt, if I do any of these things, the consequence is divorce. Okay, so if you look at porn, you're going to leave your wife? Probably not. She might, but that's her consequence to make. It's not yours. I have a Miller 252 welder. Love my welder. I absolutely love it. It's got a TIG attachment. It's crazy, and I use it 3 times a month. If I seek out, attempt to contact, or look up any of my past acting out partners, my welder's going in the back of my power wagon. I'm bringing it to the vocational center where they're teaching kids how to weld, and I'm rolling it off and saying, here you go, guys. I'm not mature enough to own this thing. I like my welder, and I act like an idiot, plain and simple. But that is one of my wife's deal breakers, right? When guys come and sit before me, or they first jump into my group, one of the hardest questions I can ever ask them is, if your wife was no longer in your life, would you still be sitting in front of me wanting to get well? And that's a big question. Because 3 to 6 months into your recovery, if you come into one of my groups, I'm going to know, not that you're deceiving me, I work with addicts, they lie to me all the time, but that you deceived yourself. And how do I know that? Because if 3 to 6 months in, you're not doing the work of your recovery while she's still in your life, what would suggest that you would be doing it if she wasn't? And that's big. That's believing behavior. That is part of the pain for love dynamic that when we start getting into the stories and the pieces that we start to attach and the negativity bias and I don't want to do this thing and all this stuff, that's what gets in the way. If you guys can picture, you remember when we were in grade school, there was a number line? Negative numbers, 0 in the middle, negative numbers to the left, positive numbers to the right. When we get to this place where we start to write stories about our recovery, about what is happening, we work on this pass-fail mentality. Well, my counselor said to try this, and I tried it, and it didn't work, so I guess it failed. No, we keep going, we keep trying. But there is an exchange sometimes. For guys that have answered that question, yes, Matt, I would be doing this work if she wasn't. And I look at their recovery and I said, well, wait a second. You came home or you have the opportunity to date your wife and she's receptive and you guys are moving toward her. And you're starting to love her into the positive digits on that number line. Well, the idea is to keep loving her into the positive digits on that number line. Some couples come back from their intensives well into the positive digits. It's amazing, the miracles that we see. But then life... and she's not yelling at me, and I don't have to deal with the conflict so much, and we start backing off. And the next thing you know, you end up at 0. It's a very dangerous spot for a guy in recovery. Things are going relatively well. He's not really doing his work. She's not really yelling at him. Things are stable. And that's a dangerous place because something will happen, and she'll get triggered, and she'll get knocked down to -4. And then all of a sudden the guy will go, oh my gosh, I got to go get her. I got to do my work and get her over here. And I got to bring her back. And I got to toe that line and get her. And then he gets to 0. And he stops. Now, there's one thing that I know about the very courageous ladies that I've worked with, is that they have no problem going into their group and wearing it as a badge of honor when their husband is actually doing their recovery work. They may not tell you. Why? Because there is a universal feel that, well, if I tell him how great he's doing, he'll stop. He'll stop. That's not an uncommon fear for my ladies, and I get it. Because some guys do. Oops, she told me how great I am again, I guess I can stop. Oh, but in those moments when she gets triggered and then we go back and we bring her back to 0 and she's, okay, I got her back. She's not mad at me. She's not yelling at me. I can just status quo. Or she doesn't feel loved or cherished or pursued or wanted or desired, or you haven't been following your sex agreement or your dating plan. And then she gets upset and she's at -4 again. And then all of a sudden you start dating and pursuing and chasing her and getting her back. But when you get her back to 0 consecutively and you don't continue to love that person further on that number line, that's pain for love. Why do I have to be in pain and yell at you about your recovery that you're not doing so that you'll actually do your recovery? So I have to be in pain for you to do your recovery work. That's not, sure, Matt, I'd do this work if she wasn't in my life. No, it's conditional. How come she has to say, hey, I feel unloved for you to love me? That's pain for love, and it's an exchange, and it's not a fun one. So if you find yourself in that space with your recovery work, or you have a story that says, hey, things are kind of stable, realize that you may be one bad move away. And when you function in that pain for love thing, that platform of safety is hanging on by a thread. And you will not build trust in any relatively quick timeline. But there's good redemption in this. When you find the heart of what it is to really move through this, you will see that there are positive moments to be savored. When you walk in the room and you change your mindset. When you look at your wife when she's sitting at the table, or when you look at your husband, do you go up? There she is again. She looks kind of mad at me. Or do you really sit for a moment and go, wow, look at the way the light hits her hair. She's beautiful. What a gift that she's here and she's with me. And I'm going to knuckle it in every way. I'm in awe. I'm in awe of my wife, but I had to take the masks off her that the stories that I told myself about her tried to confirm when she was not great with me. Do you look at your husband when he's doing something that you've asked him to do, and do you go, wow, I got a pretty capable guy. Look at the things that he can do. Or do you just see the bullet that he gave you in those moments? It's very hard to step out of seeing the version of an individual who hurt you, and it did hurt. It's different for a lot of people, right? It's not like you walked in a room and found him laying on a floor with a needle hanging out of his arm, or a fifth of vodka in the back of every toilet tank in the house after bonding him out for his third DUI. That's crazy stuff. But it's sometimes easier to wrap your mind around that than a guy who's a sex addict who doesn't physically look any different. He didn't have a needle. What is it? You may have found the needle, but the needle looks different. It comes with something that lies to you and says, well, wait, that's what he looks like, and I'm not that, and that's what he likes. That's the story that you attach to it, and if you really believe that, his addiction would go down all kinds of different roads. And the girls on pornography are not you. Why? Because his addiction was attached to whatever it was to meet his needs. Like I said, that was just the bell that rang to get him to that place. What you let it tell you about who you are, that's some really good work when ladies do that. It's powerful to see them overcome. My wife did very little to no recovery work, but yet she's like, those girls got nothing on me. Why? Because I got you. My wife told me a long time ago, as she threw $250 worth of Dr. Weiss materials in a campfire, you are mine, I am yours to lose and yours to keep based on how you behave. And I went, okay, I got to do this on my own. I love to see when the partners really, really work recovery. It's beautiful to see ladies find their voice and find their strength and say, no, I'm not an object, but I do need to be loved and cherished, and show me that I can trust you. Show me that I mean more to you than this ridiculousness that you've been chasing. And it is ridiculousness. Think about it. I'm all stressed out. I got to go look at filthy stuff and play with myself. What? Like what? It doesn't even make sense when you say it that way. It doesn't. I'm sorry. I tell guys, I know it sounds crazy, but I don't care if you need to think of my big rear end sitting next to you going, put that thing away. I don't care if that imagery helps you. It will. Believe me, I've had a bunch of guys that are like 3-4 years sober. Matt, ever since you said that to me, there's no way I can even get close to that. Fine. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. But I want you to know that your partner is your helpmate. And there really can be hope and healing in this thing. Guys, if you're doing your steps, your wife's waiting on step 9. But ladies, I'll tell you, step 9 is where step 9 is for a reason. He needs to make amends with you, but he also needs to go through the maturity and the process and the growth that it takes to get to step 9. And my hope is that at some level of pace, that is happening, that you will see good fruits of recovery. But there are times where he has to believe your behavior too. And we need to know sometimes as men that there's a carrot, that I'm not just doing this for myself, and I need to be okay that whether you stay with me or not, that I still need to be okay. But every now and then there needs to be a carrot that says, hey, I appreciate that you're doing this work. And men, you need to affirm that I appreciate that you stayed with my knuckleheadedness. There's something beautiful about that. Why? Because we have a few different pieces of loss that I think sometimes, and ladies, this is just something I really want to validate. We have the partner betrayal trauma that comes from either finding out about the infidelity, the porn, the masturbation, or whatever the magnitude of the crazy is. That creates a wound, and it is a trauma. Then there's the lie. Wait a second, the guy who I gave my heart to when I asked him and I had the proof right in my hand, he lied to my face. So there's that. But then there's the hidden one not a lot of ladies think about, and it's the self-betrayal. I think most ladies in our lives have made a promise, I'll never stay with a guy who X, Y, Z. Never stay with a guy who lies to me, never stay with a guy who hits me, who cheats on me, who emotionally abuses me. I'll never. And then what happens? Your worst nightmare is realized, and you stay. So sometimes you might be angry, and you can't explain why you're angry. And if you can't sometimes, it just might be that piece of it, that you have broke every promise that you made to yourself in that moment by staying. But believe me, you stayed because of something deeper. You may hate addict him, but you probably love the guy who was in relational reality with you, stood before the Lord, that was a good student of you at one point. You love him. You do, and he's there. We just got to get the pile off of him and let that seed mature and grow and bear good fruit. Dr. Weiss has a really great video. The title's a little tumultuous. It says, when I married a child, don't expect a man right away. It's a great video because it explains the dynamic of that maturity process and how that emotional IQ can grow. But as we move to that place of step 9, guys, if I can give you some wisdom, because you may fail tomorrow, you may fail this afternoon, you may fail tonight. But when you do, and this goes for the ladies too, for both of us. Why? Because we are two become one. When we make amends, the making amends is very much a process that has to have two components of it or it's not going to stick. It's very easy for me to say, Ginny, I know that what I did to you caused you some pain and it hurt. And I said some things that were egregious that no, your husband shouldn't have to say to you. I'm not married to her, by the way. So please forgive me and I apologize. That's not bad, is it? It's missing something though, isn't it? It's missing something. I didn't acknowledge what she went through at the hand of that behavior. I just absolved myself and told her what I did and what I owned. Right? But if I had said that same apology and said, hey, not only did I do these things, but it made you feel worthless, it made you feel scared, it made you feel, I'm sure, many things I can't connect with, but I need to, that my apology needs to be not just about what I did, but about what you went through at the hand of my behavior. Because if we don't, the other person goes, yeah, but what about me? What about the crap I got to go through every time you do this? What about me? And they're right. So as you go through this, know that you are going to fail. He is going to fail. She is going to fail. She's going to call you names. She is going to be angry. You are going to fall apart and be extremely childish. It's going to happen. But how we come back from it, how we make that amends and a living amend. But how many times, Matt, how many times do I have? 7 times 70. Take that for what it is. But again, forgiveness doesn't mean trust has been restored. Doesn't mean things aren't still going to happen. It just means that, okay, I'm willing to move forward in this relationship by no longer using the past to hurt you or I any longer. I'm not going to self-traumatize myself about your stuff. If you look at the partner's material, the one thing I love about the wording of the partner's material, if you've never worked on the partner's 12 steps, is step one is that I am powerless over his sexual addiction. I am powerless over his intimacy anorexia. And when you realize that you are powerless over another person's stuff, man, there's some freedom in that. And that's the first place of healing. But you're going to fail. Make your amends. Stop with the I'm sorries. I used to be that guy. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Like if I tell her enough times, she'll believe me. But my wife, since she was a little girl on the playground and somebody called her a name or pushed her down or said she was ugly or fat or her hair was wrong, has heard little boys for years of their lives, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. Men apologize. Little boys say, I'm sorry. Okay? You guys are amazing. And I'm very blessed to have been invited here and to spend these days with you and to share my crazy and a little bit of my story and my filthy mouth in your nice, beautiful church. Forgive me, Lord, I know not what I do. But you guys are really, I know that some of you are in some tough places, and I just would love to just pray over you before I go. So if you guys just proclaim it with me here. Lord, let me just put a hedge of protection and just all of the dynamics of the pain that you, Lord, are the ultimate healer of. Let them just see your face in their recovery. Let them see your face in the moments of beauty and the glimpses that you can show these couples in their marriages and these men that are pursuing their careers or opening groups or doing something with this information to just help take back ground for the kingdom. For those men out there that have been called to singleness, that they find the beauty and the grace of what it is to live free and to walk strong and to not be bound by the spirits of rejection or shame. Let the questions that were unanswered tonight be answered, Lord, by you, that we couldn't get to in our round table. And Lord, thank you for inviting me into this house and for the gift of Tom and Michelle and their ministry and pastor of this church and this beautiful, beautiful sanctuary, Lord, that you just have anointed to be the healing place for some really difficult stuff. And Father, I ask you to look over this worship team as they close tonight in the goodness of who they are and how they serve this church family. In Jesus' mighty name. And the whole church said, Amen. Bless you guys. Thank you.